The federal government yesterday defended some of President Muhammadu Buhari's decisions in the last 8 years, especially his choice of service chiefs, his long absence following a prolonged ailment, as well as his alleged failure to sell off some assets in the presidential fleet as promised during his election campaign. Presidential spokesman Femi Adesina explained that the appointment of service chiefs should not be subject to ethnic balancing or the federal character principle. The president in the last 8 years had come under severe criticisms for alleged sectionalism in the choice of his service chief and heads of security agencies to the exclusion of certain parts of the country. But Adesina maintained that Buhari reserved the exclusive right to appoint whoever he wanted and from wherever he desired, arguing that the criterion for such selection was competence and not the ethnic grouping of the government officials so appointed. Well, Mr. Femi Adesina has spoken. Dr. Bati, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, but the thing was reported as the federal government speaking. But, of course, it was Femi Adesina granting an interview and doing, what he's engaged to do, which is to defend his principle and to also, defend the policies and actions of the federal government of Nigeria as the chief spokesperson in the presidency. Well, there is an aspect of his, presentation, of his argument. Well, aspects that we should just isolate. One, he defended the choice of service chiefs. And his argument has been that, the service chiefs were chosen on the grounds of merit and competence, and that it's clearly within the prerogative of the president to appoint whoever he likes as service chiefs. Yes, that's correct. Section 5 of the 1999 Constitution grants the president executive powers. He can hire and fire. The buck stops at his desk. But at the same time, the key point that people have made, and the person who made this point more robustly was Waziri Atiku Abubakar, the presidential candidate of the People's Democracy Party, who said, if you look at the list of service chiefs, that 17 of them across all the services, are from only one part of the country. Other people also complain about this, that this marks of cronyism, marks of bigotry, marks of discrimination against other persons in the country. And so Femi Adesina has argued that, look, when it comes to security, it's not about federal character. But the only thing that he needs to be reminded about is that the same Constitution of Nigeria that gives the president executive powers in section 14, sub 3, also states very clearly that, look, appointments in the country, must be done in such a way that everybody has a sense of belonging, irrespective of their ethnicity or religion. A principle that is further sustained in section 42 of the same 1999 Constitution, and which is also upheld in that same Constitution with regard to the appointment of cabinet ministers, which says you must take your ministers from every state, must be represented so that Nigerians can have a sense of belonging, because we are a multicultural, multi-plural, diverse country. So the whole idea is to retain that principle of diversity. So the argument that is being pushed by Femi Adesina in that regard, can be countered very easily by quoting the same Constitution that gives the president the powers to hire and fire. The same Constitution prescribes how that can be done in the best interest of the Nigerian people. Anyway, I didn't watch the interview, but I read the report. What brought that about is concern about, okay, what has the administration done about security? And Femi Adesina's point is that, well, we're better off today than we were in 2015. And that under President Buhari's watch, much progress has been made. That, again, is debatable. Because if you were to get a man like Governor Samuel Otom, in whose territory, 134 persons in about 3 or 4 local governments have been killed over the last weekend. He has been consistent in saying that, look, a certain group has been, attacking his people and killing them. If you go to southern Kaduna, you go to Zangon Katav, and those places, the persons from there will not agree with you that security has improved. But by whatever measurement or information that is available to the presidential spokespersons, he says, look, there has been improvement. He admitted, however, in one regard that, yes, the administration may have started a bit slowly because of the president's ill health, which according to him lasted for about, 88 days, he said?
He said 8 months.
8 months. But if you calculate it, in fact, cumulatively, the president was away on health grounds for a whole year out of the 8 years. But, a lot of people are happy for him. They are excited that he's finishing strong health-wise. He even looks stronger than, many of the people around them, which is why we have had cause to say on this program that, look, it's God that gives good health. You never know, and anybody can be vulnerable. So sometimes maybe you don't make too much capital over a health condition. The only valid criticism you can offer is that, we should develop our health infrastructure in Nigeria so that, our leaders will not have to be going back and forth abroad just to treat something as seemingly simple as a toothache. Then in that same interview, he was asked about some of the promises of the administration. And he asked the question, does anybody have proof that the president said he will sell part of the presidential fleet? And that there were many promises made in 2015 that the president, in fact, did not know about. But that, in any case, 1 or 2 aircraft, 2 or 3 aircraft, had been sold under his watch. Well, there were many promises made truly. After all, in 2015, the APC then told Nigerians that the dollar would be, at parity of 1 naira to the dollar. That did not happen. And I think somewhere along the line, we've been told that certain over-enthusiastic, spokespersons were the ones making such promises. I hope we will not have a repeat of the same experience now that the APC has produced the president-elect. But just to save time, the more touchy part of the intervention by Femi Adesina has to do with his response to Father Bishop, as he now is, Matthew Hazan Kuka, who delivered an Easter homily in which he criticized the outgoing government and set an agenda for the incoming government. So what Femi Adesina said clearly is that Bishop Matthew Hazan Kuka has a penchant for cooking bad ideas. Okay? And he went on to say, look, why doesn't he remove his cassock and join politics? He says, Bishop Kuka is very partisan. Well, I'm sure that Bishop Kuka would be amused. He would not be surprised, given the fact that on a previous occasion, when he delivered another homily, he had challenged Femi Adesina and Garuba Shehu to a debate. And he said he stood by whatever he said at the time, as he's likely also to do at this time, to say, look, he is not impressed. And he thinks that to move Nigeria forward, you have to do A, B, and C. The whole point of all of this is that, look, there is a growing culture of intolerance for alternative views in our environment. And spokespersons are guilty of this. I know some of them may say, well, you two used to be like that. But in any case, let's deal with the principles of the matter. I think, we should allow ideas to fly, ideas to multiply. And those who are in the corridors of power, should develop this habit, a more contemplative habit of taking other views on instead of resorting to abuse, harassment, vilification, the kind of character trait that we have seen on a grand scale, very disturbing scale, in the course of the electoral process of 2023. But I'm sure Bishop Matthew Hazan Kuka is more than well equipped to respond to, Femi Adesina if he chooses to do so.
Well, just to say in terms of what Mr. Femi Adesina said during his interview, look at some of the things very quickly, since Dr. Bati has really broken down that speech. But one of the things I'll just mention is that he had talked about the presidential fleet. And the reason why this is quite key is because it's in line with what the president promised or didn't promise during his campaign in 2015. According to records, he did say that he was going to cut down the cost of governance and reduce wastage. And he said that he was going to look to the presidential fleet and look at, see how they can save money in that regard. In fact, in 2016, Alhaji Garba Shehu had actually given an update on that in terms of the fact that we're looking at putting up some of the fleets up for bidding. But by last year, the budget proposal for the presidential fleet had gone up by 191%. So even if he didn't say he was going to sell the fleet, in terms of cutting down waste and the cost of governance, he failed in that regard. So we can nitpick and look at how words were used or what terms were used, but the principle of what he had said in terms of saving money or in terms of cutting down the cost of governance was largely not done. Now, with regards to other areas, and this brings up to question the integrity of the speech or campaign promises, because come a few years down the line, are we going to begin to use a fine-tooth comb to look at the manifesto or the campaign promises of the president-elect to see whether or not he is delivered? If we start to cherry pick and say, okay, he didn't say it this way, he meant X, Y, Z. There are many areas, and a number of people have listed over 64 promises that the president made during this campaign that he hasn't fulfilled, and now he has about 50 more days to go. In addition to that, he talked about his ill health. Now, the significance of this is that when the president-elect was campaigning, one of the things that came up a number of times was the status of his health. And some of his supporters, some of his campaign spokespersons said, oh, it didn't matter, he was, as long as it took mental capacity for a president to rule. It's important to note that now the presidential spokesperson is alluding or agreeing to the fact that indeed ill health did affect governance, did affect his ability to or slow down things in the first year of his tenure. That's important to note, that we cannot put under the carpet the importance of physical and mental strength of a leader to rightly lead the people. But I mean, I could go to a litany of areas where campaign promises have failed. And it is important because a leader must be a man of integrity. And the reason why you campaign making certain promises is because you believe that the people should hold you to account. If people cannot hold you to account, then it is quite unfortunate, and it desecrates that office that you hold. Very important. And so just going back to stories, I hope that he'll come back to speak to other issues or other areas where the president hasn't actually quite fulfilled. Well, in less than 50 days, Bola Ahmed Tinubu will be sworn in as president of Nigeria. That's if the court uphold his election victory. And as Nigerians await the start of proceedings at the Presidential Election Petitions Tribunal, electoral body INEC says it acted strictly in accordance with the provisions of the Electoral Act of 2022 and its guidelines, dismissing suggestions that it compromised on standards to ensure Tinubu's victory. INEC was responding to the petition of the All People's Party seen by Arise News. Our correspondent, Godfrey, puts together this special report.
The huge criticism that have trailed the conduct of the 2023 presidential election continues, with many Nigerians counting on the courts to see if the final judicial decisions over the cases in court may douse tension across the nation. The hope among the petitioners and the respondents is that the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal will bring some form of closure to all parties on whether the election was properly conducted in line with the 2022 Electoral Act and INEC guidelines or not. This tends to give an impression that Nigeria's electoral umpire, INEC, is on trial. With this, the public is counting on the electoral body to convince the tribunal and Nigerians that it delivered on its mandate without favoring any candidate. A total of 5 petitions have been received by the Tribunal Secretariat so far, but those by Labour Party's Peter Obi and People Democratic Party's Atiku Abubakar have stolen the spotlight, generating widespread debate. With the documentation by the legal teams of the parties beginning to take shape, that of INEC, led by former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Abubakar Mahmood SAN, seems to provide answers to all the questions raised by the petitioners. For instance, INEC's reply to the petition of the Action People's Party (APP) that it acted in breach of the Electoral Act and its guidelines is clear and simple. The electoral umpire insists that it acted strictly by the books. In its reply dated 9th March 2023 and obtained by Arise News, INEC dismissed the notion that results collation were to be done electronically. Citing paragraphs 50 to 55 of the regulations and guidelines for the conduct of the 2023 general elections, INEC says the mode of collation was manual for the various forms EC8A to EC8E of the presidential election. It dismissed allegations that its officials and presiding officers doctored results to favor a particular candidate, faulting further allegations of overvoting. INEC further states that its online result viewing portal or IREV became erratic at the point of collation, with members of its ICT team called in to address the problem. And to give further credence to its claim that it conducted credible polls, the electoral umpire says it will tender in evidence the report of its ICT department during the tribunal hearing, with 2 witnesses who are INEC officials scheduled to provide witness accounts for further clarity. The date for the hearing of the 5 petitions for the PDP, Labour Party, APP, APM and Action Alliance still remains unknown, as the Tribunal Secretariat tidies up documents that have so far been filed in the build-up to the legal fireworks ahead. Godfrey Eshemoge, Arise News.
Thank you, Godfrey. Well, Dr. Bati, INEC insists that it's conducted free, fair and credible elections. Your take on this story?
Well, what do you expect INEC to say? That's what INEC will say, because in the electoral process, INEC is involved as a defendant. And what INEC is saying, basically, in response to the petition, 5 political parties, with regard to the presidential election, have gone to the presidential election petition tribunal. The APP, the PDP, the Labour Party, the APM, and the Action Alliance, the AA. And in this regard, INEC's lawyer, counsel, is responding to some of the issues that have been raised. Well, these are issues that will be, before the tribunal, that the tribunal will consider. And the question that INEC's counsel has addressed in this particular report is simply that INEC is not obliged to do electronic transmission of results. Now, if you look at what they are quoting the electoral guidelines. Under Section 148 of the Electoral Act, INEC is given the powers to prescribe its own manuals, its own guidelines for the election, and it did so appropriately. Now, if you look at Section 47 of the same Electoral Act, Section 47 of the same Electoral Act says that, it's INEC that determines how it, handles the matter. And what INEC has said in the guidelines is that it's from EC8A, B, C, D, E that you use. In other words, it's a combination of both electronic and manual. And that's why INEC can come forward and say, well, there were glitches in terms of reporting on the portal, the IREV portal, but it was immaterial because from EC8A to E is the main document. As had been pointed out in the Adeleke case in Osun by the Court of Appeal. So, but where is the problem? Number one, ahead of the election, INEC promised heaven and earth, and we had persons on this program saying BVAS and IREV were the game changer. This is the major thing that has happened to Nigerian democratic process. The resort to technology. INEC spokespersons appeared on television and elsewhere boasting that there will be transmission of results, real time, online, technology will change everything. Now, the same INEC is saying another thing. So this should be a lesson for public officials. If you have the law and you have your own guidelines and you are acting within the scope of the law, then don't go and promise things you don't know or that you are not ready to deliver. So people are relying on INEC's own statements, and there's evidence that has been provided to show INEC officials saying this is what we will do. So which means that part of the problem with the Electoral Act 2022 is that those who are even supposed to operationalize the law do not understand it. So one of the fallouts of this electoral process will be people taking a second look at that Electoral Act and committing it to art. Section 149 of the same Electoral Act 2022 says, well, if you are aggrieved, you go to court. So, and that is what has happened with 5 political parties going to the tribunal. However, part of the problem in our electoral adjudication system is that the presumption of regularity is on the part of INEC. The burden of proof is heavily resting on the petitioners. And there are lawyers who have argued that, no, maybe that's not very fair. But in any case, that's what we have. That's the law as we have it at the moment. But the presidential, election petition tribunal has not yet fixed a date for hearing. These are probably some of the issues that will come up, along with Section 131 of the 1999 Constitution, along with Section 134.2 of the 1999 Constitution, and other technical issues that may be raised in terms of how practically, that election was conducted. But our own appeal, in the midst of all of this, is to say, well, people should have faith in the judicial system. People should not resort to their own devices, and we should allow the judiciary to do its work.
Well, just to, again, a few questions I'll just ask before I move on to the next story is, as just referring to Dr. Olisa Agbakuba's interview, SAN, when he came last week to the show, and he asked a big question around the fact that the presidential election petitions court hadn't yet responded to the 5 petitioners in terms of setting the dates for its hearing. When we talk about the case and the time taken to hear out, bearing in mind, as we said earlier on, that we have about 50 more days to May 29, it brings up a question, what the reason for the delay is. And that's just my big question this morning, is that why hasn't the petitions court responded with a date to the petitioners as to when to begin hearing? What is the reason for the delay? Are there things that we're waiting for? Are there procedures that ought to be done? Why is there a delay, bearing in mind the importance of the cases and the time limit that we have? Because as was said by INEC, go to court, go to court. They've gone to court now. Now it's the responsibility of the court to take action and respond to the petitioners. We look forward to seeing that or hearing the response in the next few days, and of course the case or the trial or tribunal taking on and going on as it ought to.